In this video, we're going to talk about plants and the alternation of generations, which is associated with sexual reproduction. Before we start talking about the alternation of generations in plants, let's do a little bit of a review of sexual reproduction. So first of all, let's take a look at the terms of haploid and diploid. And these are terms that you probably learned when you were learning about mitosis and meiosis in a previous biology course. So haploid we can also abbreviate as 1N, and diploid we can abbreviate as 2N. And what these terms have to do with, it talks about the number of chromosomes, or I guess number of sets of chromosomes in a cell's nucleus. So remember that let's start kind of looking over at diploid. So with a diploid organism, inside the cells there are going to be paired or two sets of chromosomes. So we say that there are paired chromosomes. And each pair is known as a homologous pair, so homologous chromosomes. All right, so one pair here, so this is a pair of homologous chromosomes. And the reason why we have these paired chromosomes is because the male gamete provides one set of chromosomes and the female gamete provides another set. And remember that these homologous chromosomes are similar, but they are not identical. And when you learned about basic genetics, you probably learned about alleles, which are just two different copies of a gene. And you probably learned about dominant genes versus recessive genes and different combinations, including things like homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. And those are all associated with these diploid organisms. And to give you an example of a diploid or an organism made up of diploid cells, we could say humans. So the majority of cells in a human's body are diploid, meaning that they contain two sets of chromosomes. There are some exceptions to that rule, which we'll talk about as we jump over here and talk about haploid. So haploid means that there's only one set of chromosomes. And remember that this is in each cell nucleus. So we do not have the paired homologous chromosomes. In these cells. So you might just have one set of chromosomes in the cell's nucleus. And an example would be the gametes in humans, so cells like sperm and eggs are haploid. And this could be in humans, or as we're going to find out, this also happens in plants as well. So now let's review what happens during mitosis. And we're not going to focus on the nitty-gritty details, but we'll just do kind of a quick review overview. So with mitosis, you start out with a parent cell. And whatever chromosomes are in the parent cell, ultimately that cell is going to divide and ultimately produce daughter cells that are identical to the parent cell. So the daughter cells are genetically identical to each other and to the parent cell. Now, in this example that I drew here, we started out with a diploid cell. So we had 2N, meaning that we have two sets of chromosomes. We've got the red set and the blue set. And then the daughter cells are also going to be diploid, because remember, they're identical to the parent cell. So if the parent cell is diploid, the daughter cells also have to be diploid. Now, this could just as easily happen with a haploid cell. So in a haploid cell, if the parent cell is haploid, then it is going to produce two daughter cells that are also haploid. So now let's compare mitosis with meiosis. So as we covered on the previous slide with mitosis, if you start out with a diploid cell, you are going to end up with daughter cells that are also diploid. Or if you start out with a haploid cell, the only option is for the daughter cells to also be haploid. Now with meiosis, you have to start with a diploid parent cell. And remember, diploid means that we have these multiple sets of, or pairs of chromosomes. And remember with meiosis, it actually goes through 2 rounds of cell division. So you've got meiosis 1, and then you have meiosis 2. So you end up with 4 daughter cells. And all of these daughter cells are haploid. And remember that due to independent assortment and genetic recombination, these daughter cells might end up with a different combination of chromosomes than each other. And here I'm just kind of drawing, just some real basic chromosomes, and we're only looking at 3 pairs. So we're not showing a lot of genetic diversity here, but just note that the cells are not identical. They're not identical to each other, and they're not identical to the parent cell. And this is the only option. So you have to start out with a diploid parent cell, and you have to end with haploid daughter cells. Whereas in mitosis, you can start with diploid and end with diploid, or you can start with haploid and end with haploid. So whatever the parent cell is, the daughter cells have to have that same ploidy. So let's take a look at humans, just because you're probably familiar with how reproduction happens in humans. With humans, we do not experience a true alternation of generations. we pretty much have the diploid multicellular stage, and then we form gametes through meiosis. So this diploid multicellular stage is dominant, which means that the vast majority of our lives are spent with our cells being diploid and with our organism being multicellular. We do have specialized cells that go through meiosis in order to form unicellular haploid gametes. So remember, the gametes in males are sperm, and in females are eggs. So notice with humans, we have a diploid multicellular stage and then a haploid unicellular stage. Now with plants, they have a diploid multicellular stage, but they also have a haploid but still multicellular stage. So this is kind of a key difference right here, this multicellular stage of the reproductive cycle. Now the multicellular stage is known as the sporophyte generation, and the haploid stage is known as the gametophyte. So you can think of gametophyte as having to do with gametes, and remember that gametes are haploid. So that might help you remember that. So let's start by talking about the sporophyte generation. So our sporophyte is here on our picture, and the sporophyte is multicellular, and each cell in the sporophyte is diploid. Now, the sporophyte can undergo meiosis, which is shown right here. And meiosis produces these spores, and these spores are unicellular. And remember, with meiosis, we are going to take diploid and convert it to haploid. So these spores are unicellular, and they are also haploid. Now, if those spores find a suitable environment, they can germinate, which basically means that they go through mitosis. Remember, with mitosis, whatever the parent cell is, the daughter cells also have to be. Since we're talking about 1N haploid spores, then we can only make 1N haploid cells. So this mitosis produces a gametophyte, which is multicellular. But all the cells in this organism are haploid. On the previous slide, we left off talking about the gametophyte, which, remember, it is multicellular and haploid. Now in humans, in order to form gametes, we have to go through meiosis, but plants can produce gametes through mitosis. So specialized cells in the gametophyte are going to go through mitosis in order to form gametes. And gametes, remember, we're talking about things like sperm and egg. And these are unicellular, so they're single-celled, and they are haploid. And remember, in mitosis, whatever you start out with the parent cell, you have to end up with the daughter cells having the same ploidy. So in both of these cases of mitosis, the parent cell is haploid, which means that the daughter cells also have to be haploid. And I kind of jumped over this one part about the male and female structures, the gametangia, and we'll talk about those a little bit more when we talk about the specific life cycles of mosses and ferns. On the previous slide, we left off with the production of the gametes, which, remember, they are unicellular and they are haploid. Now, two gametes can fuse, and it says fusion here, but we can also think of this as fertilization. So the two gametes fuse, and this is how we switch from a 1N ploidy to 2N. Because one gamete is going to have one set of chromosomes, and the other gamete is going to have another set of chromosomes. And then ultimately, they produce a zygote that has two sets of chromosomes. So we end up with this zygote here. And the zygote is unicellular, but it is now diploid. And that would be showing this right here, whereas the gametes we're showing right here. So these gametes fuse together in order to form the zygote. Now that zygote is going to go through mitosis. And remember, with mitosis, now we're starting with a diploid zygote. And so all of the cells produced by the zygote going through mitosis also have to be diploid. And ultimately, it forms the sporophyte, which, remember, the sporophyte is multicellular. And the cells in it are diploid. And then this is where we started. So if you go back a couple of slides, you'll see that we started with talking about the diploid sporophyte. So the cycle is going to restart or kind of just continue from there. And you can see on this picture, so the top part up here in yellow, this is going to be the gametophyte generation. Which is haploid. And then this part in green is the sporophyte generation. And the cells are diploid. So let's review this one more time. So we'll start with the sporophyte. And the sporophyte is multicellular. And the cells are diploid. The sporophyte then goes through meiosis in order to form spores that are unicellular and haploid. These spores can then germinate, which means they go through mitosis in order to form a gametophyte. And this gametophyte is multicellular and haploid. Now, the gametophyte might have male and female gametangia associated with it. And we'll talk about these a little bit more in detail when we talk about some more specific life cycles. But you can essentially think of these as kind of like the gonads. So these are the organs that are producing the gametes. So these gametangia are going to go through mitosis to form gametes. And these gametes are going to be unicellular and they are haploid. Because remember, the parent cells up here were haploid, and since we're doing mitosis, the daughter cells also have to be haploid. When the gametes fuse during fertilization, they form a zygote, which is a unicellular, so a single cell, that is now diploid. So fertilization can take 1N plus 1N and make it 2N. So fertilization can take two haploid cells and turn it into a diploid cell. The zygote then goes through mitosis, and because it is diploid, it can only produce diploid cells, and so we return to our sporophyte, which is multicellular, made up of diploid cells. And these two generations just keep happening as a cycle over and over again.